So looking at those different angles of how the arm goes up. Then as we get to this level, we've got the clavicle, which is basically S-shaped. They call it crank-shaped. And when you think about the shoulder going through a revolution of movement, then it takes a crank to start a revolution. So that's how I remember those facts. So what you've got with the collarbone is, of course, that it meets at the sternum here, which is part of the thorax. Underneath it is the first rib, very tightly and acutely positioned. Then the second rib, a little bit more flared out than the first, with the scalenes and other muscles attaching to it. So when we get to the point of moving further up from 90, we get another 30 degrees of movement by the subclavius muscle contracting and elevating the scapula, the clavicle, sorry. So the subclavius muscle underneath here contracts and starts to pull the clavicle further up. And because of its crank shape, and as it rises, it rotates superiorly, and that gives us another 30 degrees of movement. So we get to 90 degrees, we start to get augmented movement by the clavicle moving up, the scapulo-thoracic joint is going, the center of axis is revolving with it, and then the crank shape of the clavicle elevates it another 30 degrees until we get the full abduction. And full abduction of the arm, you should be able to put your hand to your ear on either side. So to me, that's a good range test for a person. I go, okay, can you put your hand to your ear? Can you put your hand to your ear? If there's any lack of movement, then you start to look at which joint, which part of the joint is not working. Also, the joint should be able to rotate to go to the back pocket. It's really important to understand those movements, that you've got an internal rotation taking place at the glenoid cavity here. So the arm has to be able to internally rotate to go posterior and then reach around to become behind. You should be able to put your hand on your own sacrum. So again, I ask people, how far can they move their arm? What ranges can they do? And can you put your hand on your sacrum? And again, that looks at different muscles and ligaments when they've got that as a difficulty. So that's subclavius. What's that? Right. So we consider it as a gear train. So as we're moving the hand, that's moving the arm bones, that's moving the scapula, that's moving, transferring the loads onto the thorax, and that then becomes, to me, a gear train. So what I'm fixing in a person is the gear train, not a particular joint. But because this is sati and we're looking at the ligaments place a big importance on shoulder releases of all of the extremity joints, the elbow, shoulder, and the wrist. So we'll take a moment to look, this is all in the book, but we're looking at the ligaments here of the shoulder joint. So we've got a ligament here called the conoid, a ligament here called the trapezoid, a ligament here called the coracoid acromion. We've got a one here called the coracoid humeral. We've got the acromioclavicular joint at the top, and we've got the glenohumeral here. So basically, when you look at it, it's surrounded by lots and lots of ligaments, and those ligaments hold the joint in place, and to me represent totally an icosahedron. So I just see an icosahedron that if a shoulder's got a problem and it's being pulled forward because of the anterior pull on the pectoralis minor, if it's being pulled inferiorly, say by the subscapularis or the teres major or the teres minor, or any of those muscles pulling it incorrectly, then at rest it's not going to be able to move through its normal range of motion. So muscle tests are really quite important here. Because we're looking at a cartwheel, you've got muscles above and from all directions holding that bone, the sesamoid bone of the scapula, in suspension, which then has to revolve around that axis. So the muscle tests become quite important, and that's why we need to familiarize ourselves with the way these muscles are positioned around that center of axis, which is right here. So you've got your teres minor, your teres major, you've got your triceps acting on there, you've got your supraspinatus, you've got your trapezius coming off the collarbone. The front here, you've got your subscapularis. Did I mention the infraspinatus, supraspinatus, deltoid, triceps, biceps, all pulling off of here. So when we look in here, you're coming up the arm here and tracking up. You've got the short head of the biceps coming to the coracoid process. You've got the tendon of the coracobrachialis coming from the same point. You've got the long head of the biceps going to the top of the humeral head. And you've got the pectoralis minor coming down to ribs 3, 4, and 5. So the teres minor is, to me, a very abused muscle, because we all slide glass, we're doing things with our hands, and any pulling or pushing. And what I noticed more and more and more, when I'm looking at different people, the way they work and move, everything becomes the backstop on the shoulder, whereas it should be coming the backstop on your toes. It should be coming through your spine, but that's the way we should be moving. So when we look at those muscle tests, we're looking for the range of motion, which is important. We're looking for the tonicity, which is important. And we're looking for any that have fibrosed and become dehydrated and therefore shortening and therefore losing some of the transmission that would pass through the normal facial band. So one of the things I like to do with shoulders, and I remember way back when I was taught muscle testing back in 1979 actually, was that we did a muscle dance. So we'd all stand up and face each other and we'd say, okay, this is the deltoid, and this is the PMC, and this is the PMS, and this is the supraspinatus, this is the anterior deltoid, this is the latissimus dorsi, this is my teres minor, so forth, infraspinatus, subscapularis. So if you get a person and you're moving them through those ranges of motion, rather than do orthopedic tests that I feel strain the joint even further, if you had painful strain in there, is to, as you're doing the muscles, you go to position them. And if I can't put the joint in a position to test, say, the deltoid, if they can't get the ab there, I just pronounce that weak, rather than put them through any distress. But to go through those motions that we talked about, be able to put the hand behind your back in a rotary fashion, you need all of those muscles. Can you see where we're going from here? So we've got, say, we're going from deltoid to infraspinatus to subscapularis. We're pulling backwards, so we're pulling with the teres minor, we're pulling with the teres major, the latissimus dorsi is pulling back there. It's not being opposed by the supraspinatus. And so again, you can start to see this wheel around the joint all having to be intact. Does that make sense? So the muscle tests are quite important as to finding out what's going wrong. So for instance, if we take this fella here, we've got latissimus dorsi on there coming through. Yeah. So you've got the deltoids right on the top. You've got the infraspinatus, teres minor and teres major pulling this way. On the insides of that, you've got the subscapularis all coming into these points. And you can see that if you had a weakened tricep or a weakened bicep, where they insert into is going to allow that part to be elevated. If the latissimus dorsi isn't pulling it back and down, if the rhomboids aren't holding it against the scapula, against the thoracic, the scapulothoracic joint isn't going to work properly. And so muscle tests are a big part of the evaluation of your shoulder, and then movement, and then ligaments. So is that enough about the dynamics of the shoulder? Also, as we look at the facial band coming through the rhomboids and coming around here to become the anterior serratus, it obviously involves the thoracic rib cage. And if the scapula can't move over that rib cage properly, again, it's going to cause problems. So you've also got to think of the rib cage and the anterior serratus and the rhomboids and even the subscapularis as being problematic to shoulder motion. So as we're working with that, and we want to go into these different places, we're going to use the ligaments of the shoulder to inhibit, to start to get movement in directions that's restricted in the client. So where do we go next? You'll look at the case study sheets. Which muscles do we need to evaluate and test? Back to the ribs?
Yeah, because we didn't really cover ribs much last
time.
Right,
Right, Jill's saying we didn't cover ribs too much.
And so, and I've noticed there's no ribs in the module.
Right.
So you're going off the ribs that are in all your homework questions, which I'm guessing you've realised because you're looking for them, are all in Dennis's the spine book for your ribs.
Have we got a thorax just without the rest of the pelvis?
Yeah.
So I can put it on here. I think it's upstairs, that's one. I was counting beanbags yesterday.
It's very much the same.
Yeah. You pass that model up. There's no call. Yeah. Great. I'm just waiting for a thorax model so we can start looking and evaluate the ribs. And also this one is really, really useful, again, for shoulder evaluation. We'll go with this one. Thank you. It's got scapulars on, it's got scapular humeral. Yeah. So when we're looking at a rib cage, what we're looking at is flexibility in 3 dimensions. Now, it's really important that we appreciate the full 3-dimensionality of those movements. So as mammals, as we evolved, we developed a fixed rib cage so that we could run fast, move our spine and our limbs around a fixed rib cage so that we didn't disturb our breathing. And that made us much better predators. Some things like alligators that haven't evolved as much as we have in that aspect have a muscle that actually pulls the liver down while it breathes. So it pulls the liver out of the way of the lungs. But we've got a diaphragm that does all of that for us. Now, as a diaphragm, it's got to have attachments to be able to relax and move and create negative pressure for the liver and the stomach, and also be able to relax down to provide room for the lungs expansion and also the heart inside as well. So what we're looking at obviously is this whole border coming down this side is the liver side. This side is the stomach side, the liver to a little bit. Then we come around the back, and as we come around the back, it attaches to the 12th rib, and it attaches along what we call the arcuate ligament. And arcuate means double hoop. So you've got the arcuate ligament there, and then it attaches over the stomach and over the liver and attaches the front all the way here, and then domes back over to become the coronal ligament right across the top at the level of L5 rib.